Watani, we are live here almost. So, welcome to the show, man. I know we've been hitting each other back and forth over the past week to bring you on. We got a topic here that's going to be interesting. Obviously, the big news, international news, geopolitical news, is the fall of the Assad regime and the collapse of Syria as itself. And then there's going to be a lot of jockeying of power and these power players, and then how that impacts the big power players, the great powers, so on and so forth. So. We're looking forward to doing this and bringing it back to the margin of error. I'm your host, Jason Corley, co-founder, lead poster for Qantas Insights. I've got a very special guest here. We're going to call him Watani. So welcome, Watani. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited about this.
I wanted to bring on somebody who is, up to date on these events, who's spent time in that region operationally, so on and so forth. So give us a little background. We're going to introduce you here, Watani, and why we're excited to have you on here to talk about these topics. So let's just kick it off with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Middle Eastern country. I lived in that region for about 18 years. Experienced all the conflicts, seeing it from, multiple perspectives, multiple sides, in Iraq, Syria, just, that region, entirely. And until I moved to the United States later on in life. I was pretty much a grown-up adult at that point. And then later on, I joined the military army, and then just kind of moved into Army Special Operations, specializing in human intelligence.
So
I've done multiple deployments, Syria, Iraq, Africa, and just went back to that region basically after I left. So,
and now you bring a human and a linguistic expertise, obviously, to the region, being an Arabic speaker in that region. So that I'm assuming that's exactly what you've been tied up in your career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Having the cultural background and the language expertise has enhance my capabilities in my career, especially in human intelligence, because I've always made the joke when I transition into this, I'm like, well, I can do this without an interpreter or a linguist, right? I can just do it all by myself. So that's kind of why I wanted to focus on that field specifically, because it's one thing that the language, right? But one thing is being native as well with that language. You know the slangs, the ins and outs, you know the customs, the traditions, and the background of these people, how they think, and the things they believe in, and the things that motivate them, and so on and so forth. So yeah.
So how much does the dialect change from, let's say, Baghdad to Damascus? Is it like an Irishman speaking to an Australian, or an Irishman speaking to an American, or is it not quite that pronounced?
I think Irish is. I think they have a pretty heavy accent, to be honest with you. So it's very different. But I think the equivalent to that would be if you would go from Iraq, let's say, to Syria, or from Iraq to Lebanon, and vice versa. It's going to be similar to going to the UK speaking English, and then coming back to the United States speaking American English, or like American accent, right? Same thing if you go to South American countries. Generally they all speak Spanish, but that Spanish differs from one country to another.
Yeah, so
that's kind of how I would put it.
So it's not exactly a language barrier. It's just some different dialects.
No, not at all.
Different slang. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I knew a lot of linguists in my time in the military, and they would talk about the Egyptian dialect versus the Syrian dialect and the Iraqi dialect, and their sense of humor is different, and because they'll joke on comms. They're not supposed to be joking on comms, but they would joke on comms. So you come to the U.S. And you I guess out of high school you decided to join the Army. I'm assuming the upheaval in the Middle East as a younger man, you found your way into the U.S. and then you joined the U.S. Army and you went airborne and all those other sexy things.
Yeah, pretty much. So again, I was done with high school when I moved to the United States. So
okay.
At this point, I was done with high school. I graduated high school in the Middle East, and I moved to the U.S. I didn't really go into the military right away, even though that's always been my dream as a kid, of just being some kind of military capacity. Didn't really know that I was gonna enter the U.S. and actually fulfill a dream of joining a military. But I did work different jobs, worked in real estate a little bit, did some management, even did security. But Just eventually, though, like I wanted to pursue my dream and just kind of jumping out of airplanes and do all the cool things. And I think in my early 20s, I will say, I joined the military, and it's the best decision that I've made in my life so far. It's been very fulfilling. Met a lot of great people, met a lot of good friends, getting a lot of experience, learning a lot of new things, and we're just getting started. To be honest with you, I'm not done yet. So
No, that's the story. That's exactly how it goes. It sounds a little similar to mine. I joined in my early 20s. Went in the military. I was in intelligence as well, and I spent 8 years in military intelligence. I did a deployment in Iraq as an intel asset, and I was embedded with the Second ID, Third Brigade, the Striker Brigade out of Fort Lewis, Washington. And we did a lot of roundups in Baghdad during the height of the insurgency. Petraeus had taken over at that point, or he was moving in. I think there was a switch up in between, if I recall. It's been so long ago. And then I parlayed that into a career. After 8 years in the military, I went into the intelligence community and worked with some alphabet agencies and spent a lot of time in Northern Virginia. And I kind of walked away from all that in 2015 and left it all behind. That was 16 years doing that was, I think, long enough for me, especially when I got into the agency. ISIS was the big thing, right, in Syria. It was huge from 2011 to about 2014, definitely 2012 to 2014 with all the targeting and target packages we were creating. Some of our guys on the ground, both they could be natives. We had a couple of guys that we were working with on the ground that were Syrian. Then we had obviously our assets in there as well. So in any case, it's funny how the small world, how different people from different walks of life kind of have the same ambitions. But in any case, so good, man. So look, well, let's get into the fall. Let's get into the fall of the Assad dynasty, the lion of Syria, and let's give me your thoughts on that. Tell me where what you're thinking is, first of all, how this came to be, and I'll sprinkle in some stuff that I have along the way, and then kind of where it's going. What are your thoughts on that? How's it going to impact Iraq, and then the whole nine? What's your read on that?
So, if you don't mind, I want to take it back a little bit to the 1960s, just briefly, and then we'll move on to how we got here today. So Hafez Assad, right? So Bashar's father, got in the I think 1963, the first coup that they had, which pretty much ended the experimental democratic, Syrian states, post-colonialism, I think, between like France and the British.
Yep.
And they just, they established the Ba'ath Party there and just kind of became the ruling party. But that wasn't, it started there, and I think he was like the commander of the Air Force or something like that. Like he started moving up. But then in 1966, there was another coup where pretty much Hafez was a part of, where they pretty much removed the traditional Ba'ath Party leadership, and then I think he became the prime minister, defense minister, one of those things. But yet again, there was a third coup, I believe, in 1970, where he pretty much removed the. I forgot his name exactly. I think it was Salah Jadid, if I'm not mistaken, and then he became the leader of Syria.
And you're talking about Hafez?
During that time.
You're talking about Hafez? Yeah, Hafez al-Assad,
yes,
right? Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was part of 3 different coups. The first one that ended the Republic of Syria, if you will, and then the second one that he was a part of, where it's pretty much removed the traditional Ba'ath Party leadership, and the third one that he initiated to pretty much put him in power.
Yeah, and he was a colonel in the army, right?
Initially, I think he was with the new leadership, like he was the commander of the Syrian Air Force. I think like in the early 1960s, and then in '66, he participated in the second coup, which pretty much toppled all the leadership of the traditional Ba'ath Party. And then after the second coup, he became the appointed defense minister by the new government. And then 4 years later, third coup, where he initiated that coup and he became the leader of Syria. And then that's when they made the changes to have one ruling party that rules Syria. It was a lot of changes, right? Because I think that what prompted those operators to initiate the coup. The very first one was the successful Ba'ath Party coup in Iraq in February, and then I think in March 8th, March 10th is when the Syrian Ba'ath Party, after seeing the success that had happened in Iraq, they did it in Syria as well.
Yep.
The
And
problem was
this,
with the third coup when Hafez al-Assad became the leader of Syria. That's when he started to alienate other minorities, and that's when there was like a line drawn in the sand, basically to start the sectarianism, right? Because you have a lot of Sunnis, Druze, and they have the Alawites, which is the minority. Well, that's where Hafez al-Assad is from. Most of the Alawites, they were the loyalists, right, to Hafez al-Assad. Where he belongs. So the military heads, security, the intelligence apparatus, all those important positions in the government, they were all replaced and became Alawites. They controlled everything, and they gave the Sunnis and the others some political positions in government. But really, who controlled the country, like after the third coup, when Hafez took control, was all the Alawites, right? And that's when the sectarianism started. And there was a lot of problems with that because later on, I don't remember the exact year, but there was I think in Hama, in one of the cities, I think where there's like an uprising of the Muslim Brotherhood there, and I think they called it the Hama massacre.
yeah,
They went
yeah.
door to door. I think, and again the numbers, plus minus around 40 something thousand people were killed during that massacre. So the regime started on sectarianism, unfortunately, and they replaced everybody, alienated everybody else. It's kind of similar to what happened in Iraq, and because the Sunni minorities were in Iraq, and they ruled the country with the iron fist, and then everybody else was alienated.
Yes.
And I think follow on, and his passing in 2000, and then that's when Bashar al-Assad was recalled. I think it was 34 years old at the time,
Yep.
which was not. I think the legal age was 40 to become president in Syria, but they had to change the constitution so Bashar can become president, because I think his brother Bassel al-Assad died in a car accident,
Yes.
and that's when Bashar got recalled to become. They changed the constitution and then become president. A lot of people thought there's going to be some reforms. Bashar was younger. It might be more progressive, but that was far from reality. Now, the reality was some of the former heads in the government that were loyal to Hafez, they were they didn't really see eye to eye with Bashar a lot, on a lot of different topics, especially economics, political. So some of them either were forced to resign, or just got purged, and then he replaced everybody that was resigned or purged with just complete loyalists that will just do whatever kind of he says. And that I think that increased the sectarianism over the years, and the minorities became even more oppressed and more alienated in this country. And you've seen a lot of uprisings, a lot of problems, people just unhappy, a lot of immunity disputes, and they just kind of ruled in pretty much a police state.
Yeah, and they kind of band together. So the Sunnis are the majority. The Sunni sect is the
Mm-hmm.
majority in Syria, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and then so the Alawites, they're up on the coast. So we'll look up the map in a minute. So let's just say there's about 60 miles of coastland in Syria, and that's north of Lebanon, and it bumps up against Turkey. And then you have this region. You have Latakia, Tartus, these coastal cities, and it's just a little sliver of land, and that's where the Alawites come from, right? So
Yes.
that's where their center of power was from, and that's where most of these. You talk about your loyalists. I think that most of your Ba'ath Party senior leaders and most of all of your high ranking commanders in the Syrian army are all Alawite for those specific purposes. And if they do have somebody they sort of trust, they always put an Alawite with him to make sure that nothing crazy is going on. And this sectarian violence, as soon as Basil died in the car wreck, and they recalled Bashar, who was in London at the time studying to be an eye doctor. Apparently, he was a very talented eye doctor. I was reading a little bit about him. I've always been kind of fascinated with that area of the world. He was actually a very good doctor. Supposedly, he had a great reputation. And in any case, they pulled him. Pulled him back, and there was probably some, there was some angles. I guess the opposition worked, and maybe the Sunnis found their time to strike, and maybe some of these other minority groups were jockeying away. You have the Kurds, I think the Druze in the south. You've always had this infiltration of different areas, and of course you have Iran with Shia, etc. So it was it's always been a messy situation, even post-colonialism, and these despotic, hard men seize power, and when they seize it, they hang on to it with some pretty rough tactics in order to keep the population in line, or at least scare them to such a degree that they don't want to get out of line. But as with all things, you can only do that for so long, and it just looked like it was a perfect storm. If we go back and think of the Civil War from 2011 and I think till 2018, it took Assad like 3 years to recapture Aleppo. Mm-hmm. Well, then you have Russia and Ukraine in their war, and you have Iran heavily engaged with funding Hezbollah and Hamas. Certainly Hezbollah with the Israeli situation going on with their own little intra-border fighting going on. It just looked like there was some fissures, or there was a weakness there. And these of course Turkey jumped into the chat and was backing their factions, and it just looked like it was a perfect time for it to all come apart because Russia wasn't offering the type of military assistance it was offering, especially with air power, because they have an air base. Mm-hmm. Russia has a naval base at Tartus, which they've spent years and billions of dollars investing, and they have an air base right outside of Latakia, and they were able to provide logistic support and certainly air support during the Syrian Civil War. But in any case, I was just trying to bring it all together here, and just there's a larger picture, there's a big geopolitical picture with a lot of different moving parts and a lot of great powers involved. And I think it's the Syrian National Army, or the Free National Army. That's who Turkey backs. And I think the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, is backed by the U.S. and Israel. And then you have HTS, which is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and he's kind of a mysterious figure in certain ways. Former Al Qaeda, connected to ISIS, then he breaks away from ISIS, and now he's out in front trying to look like this reformer. We'll see how that works, but then the impact that'll have on Iran as well, because Iran uses the land bridge from Iraq into Syria, into Lebanon, right, to run guns and munitions and whatever else they can do. So very cool. So all right, let's pick up there. Things started kind of coming apart maybe relatively early. We had the Lebanese prime minister was assassinated, correct, in 2005?
Yeah,
Let's zero in on that a little bit. Let's see where we can go and fast forward, past the 2010s with the U.S.-led invasion in Iraq. We were there for a long time. We still are. And let's see if we can't piece together some on the whys of how this all came to be.
Well, if we talk about the military occupation of Lebanon, correct? So
yes,
it was a way for the Syrian. I mean, initially the Syrian intervention to keep peace, during the Lebanese Civil War, but it just kind of, I guess, bring the country back together, if you will, right? But really, the reality is that's when so the style of this governing, right, or the style of this leadership of the Ba'ath Party in Syria specifically. I mean, the whole thing was built on coups and assassinating people, and just there's always going to be that next person that I can do it better, right? And I think initially the idea to go and bring back stability into Lebanon during the Civil War, but sure, that might have been the intent, but if you look at the details and when they already started, so the Syrians were back in the I think what's his name? It was a civilian. Salim al-Haus, right? He was in West Beirut, were supported by Syria, and then you have the Eastern Bloc, where I think Michel Aoun was the guy who was the military leader, basically. That like he led that front, and they were trying to keep that dispute from just kind of growing and growing. But I think that was Syria's way, and I'm not really sure how much Iran was involved in all of this, because Iran has been the biggest supporter of Syria, the Lebanon, Hezbollah, and I'll get into that here in a minute. And I think the Syrians had something to do with the assassination of Hariri, right? Because if I recall correctly, he was trying to change all of this and trying to change what's going on, and this in the involvement of the Syrian government and the military in there. And I don't think they like that very much, right? Especially when you have a leader in West Beirut that was 100% supported by Syria, and not only supported by Syria, but they also supported him because he was aligning with the Syrian interests in Lebanon. Because I think Syria wanted to include Lebanon, or at least that part has become part of Syria, right?
Yes.
It becomes part of it. So that was a big thing for Syria as well. It wasn't just the intervention to kind of help bring back stability in Lebanon, but it was more also for their interest to kind of expand
and you had
into Lebanon and take that part.
And you had a very strategic part of Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley, militarily very important for Syria, right? You can move troops and whatnot in there. I know they had some hardware, military hardware in the early 2000s, and I think they had a detachment of obviously military detachments, and they had a lot of their air defense assets in Bekaa Valley, etc. So there was just some. Anyway, I was just adding that in there. There was some obviously strategic need for the region, but like you said, also it's just expanding influence and trying to keep influence.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. Like there was a lot of strategic and political interest for Syria at that time. That's why they backed, Salim in the West, because at the time, especially in that time, like in the 80s and in the late 90s and the 2000, until the end of 2005. Syria, Israel, and the whole, the Palestine thing. I mean, that was a big thing for Syria at the time. So they needed to expand into Lebanon and just, I guess, annex that, area to, I guess, keep it as a buffer between them and Syria, and maybe it'll get them closer to Israel, Gaza Strip, and all those areas. That was a big political move. But it didn't work out because I think at the end, Salim got exiled. He was defeated, I think, in the late 80s, and was exiled. And then I think in 1991, Lebanon and Syria signed a treaty in cooperation and coordination to legitimize Syria's military presence and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it wasn't going to last very long, right? And it didn't last very long, especially after Hariri got assassinated. And then that's when a lot of people took to the streets. And that was kind of the start of, the beginning of the end of the Syrian presence and their, I guess, strategic expansion and political ideas into Lebanon and to get them closer to Israel.
So that was a 29-year occupation. I wasn't aware it was that long.
Oh yeah, I think it was. When did it start? I think it started was it in the 80s or?
Yeah, let's see if.
No, like late 70s, I think, when it started.
Okay.
Started in the late 70s, and that's when Syria intervened to Lebanon Civil War until 2005. That was a long time.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And it was about 1,000 pounds of explosives that looks like a suicide bomber pulls in. I guess they picked it up on CCTV footage and saw how it was detonated and what it did. Very interesting. And then I've always wondered, though, if that would, looking back, and maybe someone's actually written about it, if that was sort of the prelude to Syria's waning influence, or maybe internal security. I know they're backed up by Iran and Russia to a certain degree, but I've always wondered that if you can't keep your own backyard, keep your affairs lined up in your own backyard. What kind of real regional power are you? Which they're not a regional power. They've never really been mistaken as a regional power. Their military is always pointing inward. All their intelligence services designed for dissidents. I mean, they do have a military, and they got some decent units. That they're not. There's not many of them. I know the Alawite. They have actually some of these guys are still fighting. Apparently, or they're going to fight. They're trying to retreat and stage areas. They got the Tiger forces. They got some decent special forces. I mean, I don't know to what degree decent means compared to their peers, but they are capable. It's just not on a very large scale. Most of their military is heavily underfunded, obsolete equipment, obsolete tactics. But they do have a unit that gets the best and the best equipment, best training, and they're mostly Alawites. So, I've always wondered though if that Lebanon situation is it started coming apart in pieces, but you can only see it in hindsight. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Yeah, I mean that was a big part of where Syria is today, and I think I wouldn't put it past that influence of their occupation in Lebanon is still, have some remnants to this day. Because remember, I think that the Palestinian guerrillas, they were also in the south somewhere, because they were part of that conflict as well. There was the conflict between the Palestinian guerrillas, the Lebanese, and that's what pretty much was part of the reason the Civil War started. And then I think for especially Syria's position at the time, and later on with the Arab-Israel War, right? I mean, that was a prime opportunity for Syria to get in there, occupy that area, and then exert more influence on the political atmosphere in Lebanon. Of course, economically and strategically, but it just didn't last for long. I mean, that was their hopes and dreams of expanding, get them closer to Israel, in my opinion. Because at the time there was a lot of tension, especially after the Arab-Israel War. The Arab-Israel War. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of back and forth between Syria, and they were in a very, heated position between the two countries. But he talked about the military of Syria. That's kind of one thing that's really, I was kind of surprised, I'm not going to lie, how quick and how fast if you want to fast forward to 2024, we'll just go back and forth if you like.
That's fine. Let's do it.
I think as of 2019, there were more than 250, maybe, again, numbers change, but more than 250,000 active duty members of the Syrian military. I mean, that they had sure, I mean, they had a long war, especially like in the Arab Spring 2011 and all the way to 2024, but it wasn't like a large scale war, right? I mean, they've lost, let's say, hundreds, maybe a couple thousands. I was even anticipating, when watching all this unfolds, I was anticipating that I thought Damascus was going to be the last stronghold in Syria, and that's where the Syrian army was going to stage and just have their final defense to repel the rebels' attack and then push them back, maybe. But to my surprise, that did not happen. And then you start seeing all these things where there's a column, of tanks and armored personnel carriers going from Syria into Iraq, right? And they did cross into Iraq, I think through Al-Qaim, if I'm not mistaken. So what is the plan here? I don't know. It's a very interesting situation. But I think as far as geopolitical and when you look at all the other players that are supporting this or not support, depending on which side you're talking about. You mentioned Russia earlier. Yes, they have a naval base in Tartus. And by the way, Tartus is pretty very beautiful. I visited that place, like the Mediterranean, sometime in the mid 2000s, and it was beautiful. I loved it there.
I've seen pictures. Never been there. Know a lot of geography in Syria. Always wanted to go and check it out. But here's the map here of Latakia. Tartus is just further south. I think it's in this this nook here, this bulge is where Tartus is at. And then Latakia is up here. And this is where it all kicked off, if I'm not mistaken. HTS, which is the Hayat Tamir Al Sham. This is where it all kicked off. Yeah. Yep. And obviously they took Aleppo. But in any case, go right ahead.
Yeah, so the Russians, that wasn't the only thing they had, by the way. They had another contingent or some kind of base in Homs as well. Um, yeah, like right here, south of Hama, where you have it right there. They had something. They have multiple, and I think they have something in Hasaka as well, which is northeast Syria. So they had multiple, bases, camps, and what have you, especially that naval base. So that was the biggest slap for the Russians in the Middle East, especially in Syria, because the Russians or the Soviet formerly, they've been supporting the Syrian regime for a very long time.
Yeah,
All the way back into when Hafez al-Assad actually took control. Hell, even before he became a leader of Syria, when he was just the defense minister, the Russians were supporting the Syrian regime at the time, and of course because of especially with their conflict with Israel at the time. So their presence has been in Syria specifically in there for a very long time. So that was the biggest slap for the Russians, in my opinion, in Syria. But the biggest winner of all that, or it's Turkey's wet dream, if you will, to able to support the rebels and pretty much just slapping the Russians in the face. To be honest, because the Russians and the Turks, they've had a lot of tension between them in the last couple of years.
yeah,
Especially when the Turks downed that Russian jet.
yeah. So the you were talking about the collapse. It was surprising to you, me, I think all observers. But perhaps again in hindsight, maybe it wasn't so surprising considering the drain that when the Civil War kicked off in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere an account there was only literally like what you would call soldiers, like soldiers, trained soldiers. They've been to basic or they've gone to do some their version of AIT, maybe some schooling, maybe 12,000. Maybe the Syrian army had 12,000 effective soldiers, and that number could be less than that. And they're saying they really just scrounged up people. And here's a part. This is from Intel. To them about the Tiger forces. This is from yada yada. Earlier they talked about where they got the intelligence from, but up in the so the Syrian army, the Syrian Arab army has been hollowed out since 2012. There's now mandatory conscription. So most men, aside from those who are only children, have been in the military in some capacity in their life, but there were mass defections early on. So it took some time for the Syrian military, the regime, to recuperate. What they did, as other regimes have done in the past, like Sudan and Janjaweed, is essentially rounded up militias and thugs to create new forces. So that might have been why a lot of these guys were throwing their guns down. But if you've watched recent news, there are legit Syrian Arab army soldiers, all of them are Tiger Force members, who said they haven't retreated and they're not going to retreat, and they still have their military equipment. We'll see. I don't know how true this is. It was just some interviews. They were actually interviewing these guys, and he says they had like 28,000 troops and they were going to keep fighting, but I don't know if that's going to happen. That could be a lot of nothing. But it is interesting how it all just collapsed. I was also reading, because of the quickness of the collapse and the lack of fighting, Iran, their guys on the ground said they were calling back home to their headquarters and said, "Hey, these guys aren't fighting, and we're not going to sit here and die for them." And Iran said, "All right, that's all we needed to know. I mean, if they're not going to fight, we're not going to fight for them." So they loaded up their guys and left. And it just shows. I think it's just a huge disconnect, and it's often the case with dictators. Once you are out of your loyalists, nobody has any reason to fight for you, right?
Yep.
And you have four factions trying to saw you up. You got like four different factions who are all backed by other. Well, Turkey is obviously a regional power, and Iran's a regional power, and Russia would be a great power or superpower, and the U.S. would be a superpower, and you have Israel's obviously a regional power. It looks like they're going to, if Syria gets carved up in these sectarian states, which I don't know if they will. I think people just kind of read the tea leaves and were just saying, "Man, this it's over. There's no point dying for this nonsense. It's over. Syria has fallen, or they say the Assad regime has fallen." And obviously, he left the country. I mean, he's lucky. He's lucky he got that far. Most of those types of guys don't make it out, and he made it out. So yeah, man, this was wild, but it probably was, as I said, in hindsight. If you look back in hindsight, and maybe it wasn't so surprising is what I'm getting at. They had problems, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but their economy got so bad here since the post Civil War, the first Civil War, that I think unemployment was like almost half of the nation. And not only that, Bashar resorted to narco. I mean, he literally ran a narco government. They were producing their own drugs. They had all kinds of manufacturing facilities for that, just to create revenue, so so essentially he could keep his loyalists paid off. But that's how far Syria had fallen. It wasn't even a functioning state. There was just that strip of interstate that connects from Damascus up to Homs, Hama, Aleppo, and that was your center of gravity, and the rest of the country was more or less just disconnected and poor. I can't.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think the Syrian regime towards the end became a rotten structure. It just needed somebody to kick it, and it was just going to fall apart, right? And we kind of, we talked about earlier how Bashar was very different than his father, and he purged a lot of members that worked for his dad, and he wasn't very liked by the members of the military, other officials that worked for his dad. They didn't like Bashar as much. It's saying that purging a lot of them. Some of them resigned, or Force probably resigned if I was betting. And yeah, he replaced everybody with just nothing but loyalists. And like you said, you made a great point where if those guys are gone and there's nobody else around you, then people have absolutely no reason to fight for you. So yeah, the problem is what I hope I don't see. So if you look at Libya, for example, after Gaddafi, was killed and ousted, but it created a big vacuum there. It's a huge vacuum, and to this day, probably Libya is just an unstable country, because everybody now is going to appoint themselves as a leader and have a little group, and everybody wants a piece of the pie, right? Same thing in Iraq. I think 2003 was a good step. It was a good point, but then what happened is you as in with all the government, they gave you gave the whole country and the government to people that were in exile, and they don't know how to run a government, and they were always sectarian, and then in turn you have so many different factions throughout from 2003 to today that have been fighting in Iraq to this day, and then the government is corrupt. It's not even a real government, to be honest with you. So we'll see. I don't know. I just hope that doesn't happen in Syria. The same thing happens there, because it's going to be just a repeating cycle.
Yep,
it's just never ending.
Well, I got some thoughts on that, and kind of allow me to throw it at the wall here. So it seems to me that would be all right. There's a lot of competing powers, right? We've already established that, even from the great powers perspective here. It's not in the interest of Israel to have Libya on the other side of their border, or a Libya-like situation. And it's also not in the interest of Russia to have their billions of dollars at this point investment, or maybe if you go back to the Soviet Union, it could be hundreds of billions of dollars if you go back 30, 50, 40 years. The same with the U.S. and then the same with Turkey. And so if we just start with Russia, Syria, and then I think Assad, towards the end of when he knew it was over with, he was willing to do anything to keep power, and he was going to be a vessel state. I think he just basically turned the keys over to Iran if they could just help him stay in power. What's strategic about Syria is it's a natural launch pad for other operations in the region. So if you just think about moving cargo from Russia, because Russia has influence in Mali, Central Congo, I can't remember some of the names in Africa, but they have a lot of interest in Libya, and their sphere of power is, sphere of influence is in about 5 or 6 African countries. Well, to move cargo and prop those regimes up and send them military equipment and training and money and whatever else they send them flying a ship or flying that IL-76, that massive. It's I guess it'd be their version of our C-17 or something. You have to stop if it's loaded down. You have to stop somewhere, so you stop in Syria, and then you jump over into Africa. Perhaps they could pull it off by landing in Libya, but Libya is not secure. So what they wanted was also they wanted fresh water or warm water ports and access to the Med, and they had it with Tartus. Well, the same with Turkey. They don't want a Kurdistan on the other side of their border. They don't want a free Kurdistan on the other side of the border that's potentially backed by the U.S. or even Israel, or backed by Iran if they're trying to cause problems with Turkey. And then Iran loses its crescent, right? The Islamic crescent, or the Iranian the Iranian crescent, where they use Iraq and Syria to get their arms, equipment, and money to Lebanon. And then Israel obviously doesn't want something on the other side of their border that's disintegrating and causing all these other factions. Of course, I think Israel will. It's going to encroach some. It's going to retake the Golan Heights. I know. Why wouldn't you? It's full of fresh water, and the key word being heights. You can put your sensors for intelligence gathering in terms of maybe. Yeah, I mean, there's so much strategic value to put it there. Of course, your artillery goes further. Your drones, whatever, you can do anything you want in the Golan Heights. And it is but it is Syrian territory. I think the UN recognizes Syrian territory. So I know that was kind of a shotgun approach here. But what I'm saying is, it seems to be enough countries with enough power. It seems like it's in everyone's interest for it not to fall apart. However, somebody has to go in there and enforce the law and keep the peace. And I don't think the U.S. has the stomach for it, and I don't think we should too, or I don't think we should either. Russia's heavily tied up in Ukraine, and maybe even Georgia, the country. There's some things going on down there, from what I understand. And Iran. I don't know, man. It would be interesting. So perhaps one of these power players can get the good graces, but that depends on which sphere they look to. Are they going to look to the U.S.? Are they going to look to Russia? Are they going to look to Iran? Well, that will determine who's going to come in power. And if they're given the okay to rule, right? They start this new regime. What does it look like? What's its posture going to be like? That gentleman who took over. Or he's in Damascus. I don't know if he's the leader. Well, there's no leader of the faction, but he happens to be the guy getting all the press right now. The leader of
HTS.
HTS. Abu Muhammad al-Jilani. So if he's the guy, who's he going to take orders from? What's he gonna do? Is what I'm getting at. And if he gets in power, can he prevent retributions? Can he? In which he can't. I don't think he can. If it pops off, it's going to pop off. Sectarian violence is nasty. It's historical. It's generational. Is Syria going to fall to some sort of new lines? I don't know. It's interesting to speculate on, but without somebody holding it together, you wonder what's going to happen to it. I don't know.
Here's the scenarios that I have and how this could turn. There's like a few of them, and it's very similar to what happened to Iraq and other countries. But the HTS now, they have a history of extremism and whatnot. And like you said, the guy was in Al Qaeda and he had ties with ISIS, and now all of a sudden he is the face of democracy in Syria, right? So the way I see it play now is, they're going to have to play their cards right. They're newly, somewhat like interim, government or power to be recognized, if you will, right, in that country, and they're the ones who took Bashar down and whatnot. I think the extremism is there in that group. Even if he was not, even if he had different ideas now, but the HTS is a big group, and it's a melting pot of people from different groups, some extremist groups. They came together to take Bashar down. Now Bashar's over, everybody's happy now, and everybody's taking to the streets and enjoying all of this. But then what? All right, you have the SDF in the north or the northeast, backed by the U.S., which HTS don't really like. Not as far as the U.S. part, but they don't like the Kurds there. and you have the Druze in the south, or the southwest, southwest, and they don't really know how they feel about either of them, because they are like even a bigger minority there. And I've been reading and seeing some things where now they've been talking to the Israelis. They've been holding meetings with the Israelis in some villages down all the way south, right? So some of the scenarios that could play out is, I foresee more fightings in the future. I think the HDS now is just establishing itself, trying to be legitimate and recognized by big powers, whether it's in the region and internationally. Because if they don't, they're going to end up just like ISIS. They're going to get crushed by like an international coalition, basically, and they're not going to do that. They know if they show their true colors early on, they're going to get crushed. Everybody's going to turn against them, and they're not going to be, and then Syria is going to become a lawless land more than it already is. The biggest supporters of the HTS is the Turks, and this is kind of my personal opinion. The Turks are the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, right? He has this idea of the former glory and the former Ottoman Empire kind of style of ideas, right?
Yeah, the caliphate.
Yeah, maybe now the new Turkish Empire. So he has his ideas, and Syria is a big part of that. And it's funny, so you look at some of the equipment that the HDS has. I mean, stuff that you see in special operations community, like ops core helmets and some high end plate carriers. Like, where did they get that from? Turkey was 100% supporting that.
Yeah.
Not only to slap Russia in the face, but also to establish their presence in Syria and also expand more and have a stake in that land. And what I think could happen for the Turks, I don't think the HDS, once they become a legitimate government and they establish, I don't think they're going to keep the Russians there. I think they were going to formally ask the Russians to leave, in my opinion. And if Turkey plays it how I think they might play it, and that's when the Turks going to start coming in and probably have some presence in some of those areas. Not only to support the HDS, but also to have a Turkish presence in Syria, which they've always wanted to. And in turn, the Turks don't like the Kurds either. And so I foresee some fightings happening in the future, probably backed by Turkey, back in the HTS to fight the Kurds. It's something that's got to give in, right? I don't think the HTS is going to let the SDF, the Kurds in the northeast, to hold on to the territory they have, or to even expand more. And if they don't let them, they start fighting. So where's the U.S. is going to stand on that? Because we are back in the SDF, right? So, and what is the Turks going to do? But I think it's a Turkish wet dream to have legitimate presence, formally requested by the current Syrian government, if you will, or the interim government. I think that's what could happen. I mean, I can see the Israelis also expanding more into south, maybe like southern Syria, and even past the Golan Heights. Especially if the Druze formally ask them for help, or to come, especially if sectarian violence increases over the next couple of months or years. I see a lot of different players coming into this region, and Iran at this point, they don't have a reason not to kind of go all out if they want to in Syria. Their buddy is not there anymore. The regime they backed is not there, so it's kind of an open land.
Yeah.
And Iran historically does not like to fight on their own territory. Iraq has become the proxy country, and Syria was, and now it's even more. They don't have anyone that they have to back. Bashar's not there anymore. So I think in the future we're going to see a lot of that, just chaotic, unpredictable changes fighting in Syria, in my opinion. So everybody got a stake, just like you said.
Is this where the Druze live, in Swedia and Dara?
In Dara, yeah. It's like they kind of concentrate in that area.
Okay.
And I think the Israelis already started meeting with some of the village leaders. I'm not sure exactly where in Syria, but there have been some meetings there with some of the key leaders of those villages. So because it's in Israel's best interest to honestly do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And we,
100%. Because why not? I mean, Syria has been one of the biggest buffers between Iran and Syria. I'm sorry, Iran and Israel. Apologize. And now Israel has a clear line of sight all the way through Iraq and Syria to conduct air campaigns or airstrikes into Iran. And that's
yep,
why we see now that they're trying to cripple any Syrian capability that they have into pretty much into oblivion.
they have destroyed so much military hardware over the last week or so. I mean, from naval ships, bunkers,
Yep.
just these jets are just sitting out, just defenseless. They're knocking out air defense systems. I mean, they are completely destroying any remnants of a legitimate military that could be potentially used against them. And then meanwhile, they're moving equipment into the Golan Heights. This is what we were talking about earlier. For guys to be watching, the Golan Heights is this shelf, and obviously the key word being heights. It's up and it dips. There's a huge drop off, right? So you can set your equipment up here and literally collect, comment, SIGINT, whatever you want. You can just monitor news channels. But when artillery obviously goes further if you live on a high area. So it's a very strategic area to have, especially when you're trying to create a buffer for a buffer. So why not grab the high ground? And it's also loaded with fresh water, right? I think there's a huge river source that comes through there. So, and then we were talking about Alawites. So we mentioned Tartus and Latakia. This is the home of the Assad clan, and it's literally its own little sliver of land right here. So here's your coastline, and this is the Alawite minority, which is an offshoot. I don't pretend to be an expert on Islam, but Alawite, it's a mystical version of Shia, right? It's got some Orthodox Christianity elements to it. It's got some Sunni and Shia elements to it. Then it's got perhaps some Mediterranean pagan. Not to denigrate, I don't mean pagan and ugly to anybody that might be an Alawite, but I'm just saying that it's a very unique practice of Islam. I'll just say that. And there's a debate. Yeah, and there's a debate within the Islamic community if should they be considered, Muslims. So I don't know. However, they don't proselytize. I don't think they take in new members. I think maybe you can marry into it, but it's up to I don't know. I've read different things about it.
Usually, most of these sects, that's kind of the way. A lot of it is that way. Like you have to marry into it and become, whatever that sect is.
But you can't just show up and go, "I want to be Alawite." They don't really allow that. You have to.
No, yeah. So yeah, that sect and some other groups are like they're just like that, right? Like it's not. I'm just gonna walk in. Let's say just like, hey, I want to become Christian or I want to become Muslim, whatever. It's not. It doesn't work like that, right?
Okay.
It's very different. But I'm kind of curious what's next for them. But what I really think, like I said, it's. I think now that everybody's enjoying the just Bashar just the Assad's just family in general just not there anymore. But I don't think it's over. I think there's going to be historically, if you look at everything, every time something like this happens, there's there's a short period of time where everybody's happy, everybody's just like, okay, we're finally done with the regime, and then just all hell breaks loose after that because everybody now wants something. Right, the HTS, which is the most prominent group now, which they're the ones who took down the regime. But what's next for them, right? And also, what's next for Turkey and
Iran,
the Turkish and Iran as well, because the Turkish intel chief went to Damascus already, right? And he met with the HTS leader and other key leadership in there. So, what is Turkey's really goal here? And what I think, just knowing how Turkey is and how their leader is right now, I think they're looking to expand more, actually have to solidify their presence, and will have some presence in Syria, in my opinion.
Do you think it'll be? I'm sorry. Do you think it'll be a buffer, in the form of a buffer along this border?
Well, I mean, I think it can go beyond that. I think they will have, so just like the Soviets did in Syria, just back in the 60s and in the 70s, they have a lot of Soviet members, whether they're like trainers, advisors, and so on and so forth in Damascus for the government. but they were not formally there, but they were kind of there. They were supporting them like indirectly,
I see what you're saying.
sometimes.
I
think the Turks will do the same thing. And then what's the fate of these Russian bases there? Right? If they were formally invited and accepted by the former Syrian regime, well, what's going to happen to them now? Because some of them always started to leave. Right? They started leaving because what are they going to stay there for? And if they completely abandon all the bases they have, especially the ones on the coast, then who's going to take that next? Right?
That's what I was saying. I wonder if Russia would. I guess they could, but Russia would be giving up a lot. Like I said, billions upon billions, building a legitimate naval base in Tartus, using the airstrips to move man and equipment into Africa. The same with Iran. When all this civil war in Syria became unstable, all they did was, they did a lot more, but they said, okay, well, we're not going to be able to move our equipment. Business isn't quite as usual, so they go and invest in Yemen with the Houthis, and they just said, well, we're going to hit Israel from this angle now. We're still going to supply Hezbollah in Hamas to a lesser degree, but definitely Hezbollah. So they go and create a proxy military in Yemen to hit Israel from the south, and of course we still haven't stopped. I don't think maritime traffic is even back to where it was even when the U.S. got involved with their naval forces. So it's interesting to see how the chess pieces move when it's the great game, from when Russia and England or Russia and Great Britain were playing the great game in Central Asia and Persia. And now we're seeing it. It's just going to be. It's just a repeat of the game. It's just that the pieces have moved. But yeah, man, I don't know if Syria is just threaded together with people who don't like, different people who don't like each other, historical grievances. And if you're an Alawite and you've been living under the Assad regime since 1970, life's probably been better for you than it has been the rest of the folks. And it's hard for people just to forget that. Especially when you had unemployment approaching 50% out of the last 10 years. You got the Bashar Assad family, who's, individually they're worth $1 billion or more. I've read different estimates. I don't know if he moved all that money, but I know he's got a lot of money, and he probably had contingency plans in the event that the country collapsed. He's not going to be living in the bread lines, I can tell you that. I think there's even reports that he's going to start practicing medicine again in Moscow. So that would be interesting to see. Maybe he'll go back to his first love, and he never really wanted this anyway. And he was just the poor guy that got sucked into the halls of power by fate more so than ambition. Anyways, I guess it's a poetic story if you want to make it a poetic story. I don't know, but this
sure is.
This is going to be nasty.
Sure is.
Now look,
it is going to be nasty. Yeah, I agree with you.
The population in Syria is what? Probably 28, 35 million people? Something like that?
Give and take. Yeah.
But it isn't, it's the western portion, it's where all the population is, right?
Correct. Yes.
But even though the Euphrates is it's a relatively large river, it's their version of the Mississippi in America. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have a lot of floodplain, even though it's an ancient river, there's been people living on it since antiquity. But there's really it doesn't yield a lot of farmland, from what I understand. Like, a lot of people don't live out here.
Not a lot. No.
Yeah.
Unless you go to Raqqa, which is it's a big city there.
Up here? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big one. You got, kind of Aleppo doesn't really, but yeah, those are kind of like the countryside. But yeah, the more northeast you go, because I was in Syria.
I was going to pivot to that if you didn't mind. I was going to tell me a little bit about Syria, what you did there, and where you were at.
Yeah, so Syria mid 2000s. This is before I even moved to the States. I was in Damascus at that time, and I was a young teenager. I didn't really know a lot about what's going on and who's this and who's that. And I remember very vividly, I went to a carnival. Syria at the time. There's a lot of people from other countries in the Middle East. They would go spend a vacation there, basically, because the weather was nicer. There's a lot of things to see. There's a lot of Saudis that used to come to Damascus and spend their money and just enjoy, just kind of get away from the summer in Saudi Arabia and whatnot. But I didn't really understand the the presence and the influence of, like, for example, the Lebanese Hezbollah, until many, many years later, and now it just kind of became more kind of aware of what's going on and who's what. But back in the mid 2000s, I was at that carnival, and there was kind of some Syrian singer just, singing and doing some stuff, whatever. But then everything just changed out of nowhere, and just flags started to come out, and they start handing flags to everybody, just sitting there watching.
They were
And it was
hanging
a
what?
big
They were hanging.
flags. They were passing flags, Hezbollah flags.
Oh, okay, got you.
Oh yeah, that was like in the mid 2000s. And I'm just looking around, like, what is going on here? And everybody's cheering, and there's like some Hezbollah, like, I wouldn't say like big official, but like members, promoting the group and whatnot. And that was the mid 2000s, and I didn't really know like who Hezbollah was and how significant they were and why they were in Syria to begin with. But I remember even then, and they were fully supported and allowed to hold these gatherings, and to just do all these activities in Damascus. And I thought that was the craziest thing. And I also saw them in north of Damascus in a city called, what is it called? It's a big country. It's like a country town, if you will. Man, I'm drawing blanks here. It's not Aleppo. It's something else. Zebedani, the Zebedani city. I think it's either south or north of Damascus. That was a big country, a country area, like a countryside, if you will. There's a lot of Hezbollah members there, and I thought it was pretty crazy. And again, I didn't know much about it then, but then when you start learning about it, I was like, wow, this is pretty intense. So the Hezbollah presence and their relationship with the Assad regime, from what I remember it at least, this dates all the way back in the early mid 2000s. They used to hold activities and gatherings all the time. But aside from that, I really enjoyed Damascus as a city. I'm a big history nerd, right? So I love history. And just seeing the remnants of like the Christians, remnants in there, the Romans and the Muslims, all the architects and the buildings and the old markets, and it's still, it was there to this day. I thought it was pretty fascinating. It was super cool.
That's the same reasons why I wanted to. I've always wanted to visit. I mean, go all the way back to the Roman Empire, the Ottoman.
My God, yeah, those are still Ottoman, there. Like when I was there,
the Ottoman Empire. Then you have these ancient Orthodox Christian churches, and then you have mosque, and you have these I think there's a street that's still there today that was mentioned in the Book of Acts in the Christian Bible. I can't remember the name of the street. Maybe it's called. I have to go back and look. But that street is still there. There's the market. There's marketplaces mentioned from antiquity, and that marketplace is still there in Damascus. I think Damascus is one of the oldest continuous habitated city on Earth. That's like 2,000 years or more. I think it's had human activity and people there. To me that's ancient.
No, it's
man.
very fascinating. It's very fascinating. It was very pretty, and like I said, I went to the coast. I went to Latakia and Tartus as well. Loved it there. It was just beautiful. But yeah, it would be really cool to visit maybe one day. I don't know, maybe with this new government, right?
You may be visiting before you know it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Did you? So you enjoyed your time in Syria and the people. I mean, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, again, as a young teenager, we were just there, like, just spending some time there. Went to the Mediterranean. There was a lot of like tourism there. It was just surprised that there was a lot of Westerners as well in Syria and Damascus visiting the old city. I remember I was walking in the old streets and went to a cafe there, and I turn around and I see like a bunch of young women speaking English, and I'm like, oh wow, this is like, I didn't think I'd see that here in Syria. So it was it had a lot of traffic, a lot of tourism. It was open for just about anyone really at the time in the mid 2000s. I saw different nationalities from the West, from the Middle East, just all over. So I enjoyed it. It was good. But even then, you could kind of see how much of a state police it was even back then. You would have you would have the secret police there, if you will. I don't know what they actually call them there, but like it's like the state police, and walking around They got sticks in their hand, and there were times where like people like would say something about the Assad regime, or they would say something, or they would just go sometimes round up. I remember there was a place that was raided somewhere in Damascus. Allegedly, it was a place where like a cafe, like internet cafe. Internet cafe is big in the Middle East, and they would go, and apparently there was like something about people that frequent that cafe. They would talk politics or talk about the regime and so on and so forth. And it was raided, and they just rounded up a lot of people. They were very serious at the time about the regime, and you would see those guys, the state police, walking around in cities and just they were very serious in their presence and what people talk about when it comes to the regime itself. And I saw that, but again, at the time, I was just a young teenager. I really didn't involve that kind of stuff. It wasn't my business. I was just there to kind of have fun and enjoy my time. But looking back at just like recollecting those events now and knowing what I know now, like wow, that was like that's what was happening. Right? It was a very interesting time to say the least. You would go there and spend a vacation on the Mediterranean, but at the same time, like you would see heavy state police presence, checking into businesses, walking around, talking to people, and sometimes even round people out. They would bring these little buses or shuttles, if you will, and they just kind of throw people in there. We don't know why, but that's stuff that I've seen happen. That was in the mid-2000s.
Did you ever do any? If you can't answer, it's fine. Did you ever do any ops? Were you ever active in Syria?
Not very much. Nothing really significant when I was there, as far as when it comes to the deployment. Like many years later. I was in northeast Syria at a small airfield, and there really wasn't any significant operations there. I was involved in one foot patrol, maybe it was like more of a presence patrol, and one mounted patrol. So there's one dismounted, one mounted. They were the only two significant that I was a part of. But even then, the northeast Syria at the time when I was there wasn't really much going on. It was more of supporting the SDF, because I helped train some of the SDF guys there.
Is it close to Iblis? Is that what you're talking about?
No, not Idlib. No, it was in Hasaka province.
Okay. Okay.
It was it's kind of even close to the border of Iraq and in Turkey, actually. It was Hasaka province.
Okay.
Because it's funny, because at nighttime you would just look in the distance and you see like a lot of lights, and then we look at the map. Oh, that's the country of Turkey, actually. It was that close to the border of Turkey and Iraq. It was all the way in northeast here, the Hasaka province. So really, there wasn't a lot of significant. It was more of building relationships there. So everywhere I go in the Middle East, specifically on deployments, I build a lot of relationships. Right, I create a lot of networks everywhere I go. Because if anybody's going to tell you about what's happening, it's people that live in there.
Absolutely.
Right, and naturally, it's an instant rapport builder when they meet somebody that's wearing a U.S. uniform and speaks their language. Right, it's an automatic. Kind of you're part of the group now. So we did a lot of that. Was not involved in a lot of like big operations or anything like that. I did more honestly in Iraq deployment than I did in Syria. Most of the fighting at the time was happening south of where we were. So a lot of things affected us in that way. But I think to kind of circle back about what we talked about, I think the biggest setback of what's happening now in Syria and the fall of the regime is Iran, for sure. That's the biggest setback. I mean, sure, the Russians have presence in Syria and have bases, and they support the regime for many years, but Iran was one of the biggest supporters of the Syrian regime. Because I think Syria was also a proxy country, especially towards like the latter years when everything was kind of falling apart. Iran was the biggest supporter, just like they are and have been in Iraq as well. And now Iran, all they have is Iraq, basically. Yep. That actually has a government that is 100% supportive of Iran and Iranian influence. So that's been the biggest setback. And I think the biggest winner of all of this, Israel is one of them, even though they're not very heavily involved physically in there, but also the Turks. The Turks are the biggest winner of this. They supported this, operation, and they funded this operation, whether it's financially or equipment, and they won basically.
Here we go. Yeah. So here, I mean, this I'll probably find even a better picture. But if we look at just some of the, and some of this is for trade, but it's also for influence and moving men and material. So some of the routes that Iran uses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the angle of the pipeline that's going to come from Turkey. They're going to, I guess, into Israel. Israel will have access to the pipeline, or the pipeline will stop into Israel, and they're going to pump this oil into Europe. And it's going to make a lot of countries very rich. Once Syria gets stabilized, maybe Hezbollah's done. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff here at play on the peripheral, maybe even conspiratorial. I don't know. I've read some different things. I don't know enough about it to really comment on it yet. I probably will as I start reading more about it. But there's going to be this pipeline from Turkey that's going to run through Syria, and Jordan's going to be involved. Jordan's always involved. They're like the Switzerland of the Middle East. They're just real secretive. Yeah. They're very neutral. They don't buck the tides. They usually back the winning power. I mean that goes back to the Jordanian king during the 6 Day War. When who was that juggernaut? The real populist nationalist from Egypt, Nasser.
Is it Jamal Abdel Nasser?
Yeah, Nasser. That's it. Yeah. And he's like, look, you guys, his military and his intelligence, and Nasser was saying, hey, man, we're winning. We're going to win this thing. He goes, why am I seeing Israeli jets flying over Jordan for winning? So he demanded some lowly enlisted man to get in his Jeep and drive him up to to look out. And he saw how the war was going. He said he pulled out right then. He basically said the future, this pan-Arabism, it was a good idea. Wished it would have worked, but it's not going to work. And he said the future points to the West, and that's when I think Jordan kind of did that pivot, and it's been like that ever since. So here we go, the Iranian corridor. So this is the influence that Iran potentially stands to lose, man.
Yep, they have lost a lot. Now Iraq is their only contingent that they have in the Middle East, because Iran has always, they always fought out. They don't want to fight on their land. They always use other countries as proxy. And of course, I want to talk a little bit about the religion, the sects, and a lot of people don't really focus on that a lot, or they don't talk about that a lot, but it is significant. You mentioned something earlier. You said this is like a generational thing, and it is. Forget about what Turkey believes, and forget about what the Iranians, and forget about the politics and the economics and strategic goals. But this is also a religious conflict as well, right? And if you look back in the early 2000s in Iraq, Iraq was nothing but a sectarian country. Sectarian, conflict between the Sunnis and the Shias. The Shias looked at it as, well, Saddam was ruling us for 30-some years, and we just couldn't even breathe or do anything we wanted to. Now it's our turn to do the same to you. So they alienated the Sunni population. They became the Shia government in Iraq became very oppressive. But then they're pretty much doing the same thing that Saddam did to the Shias in Iraq. They're repeating the same cycle, and in my opinion, and if you look at all the facts and all the researches, I think the reason ISIS became so successful and they took Mosul so easy in Anbar, because I think the Sunni population was tired of the oppression from the central government in Baghdad, and they're like, you know what, we're going to take the lesser of two evil, and at least the ISIS, they're Sunnis, they don't really want to hurt us, they want to hurt the Shia government. And that's what happened. That's why they received a lot of support. So this style of oppression and sectarianism, it just doesn't last. It has a limited shelf life. I mean, Assad did it the same way sure, they ruled for 40 plus years, but it's always going to come to an end. And that's a problem, right? But now that's lost in Syria. Iran lost that leverage in Syria. And now they only have Iraq. So I wonder in the next couple of months or maybe years, it's going to be a long journey for sure. If Iran is going to um, influence some groups or even back certain groups, then but we won't really be able to see that early on until more conflict will occur in Syria. And once things are settled, okay, and then they're gonna ask themselves, who are we gonna fight next? Right? Okay, oh, the Kurds, right, or the Druze or the Alawites, for example, and so on and so forth. And that's when you really going to see the regional powers that lost a lot in that country. That's when they're going to start to come back and just kind of play behind the curtains and support certain groups to kind of make Syria another proxy country, specifically for Iran. That's what I'm speaking about. The Turks are already there. They already been supporting. Their presence. They already sent their intel chief there, and so they're already playing. But I think we're going to see a lot of different movements, and I want to put it past. We're going to see some fighting and conflict as well in the next couple of months.
Absolutely.
Because it's just not. Yeah, it's going to happen. It's just bound. It's inevitable. You just can't say, oh, this is the new government now. They're not going to do anything. They're just going to take Damascus. They're going to let the Kurds take their piece. They're going to let the Druze take their piece, and that's it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to see more fighting and killing at some point.
That's usually the way it goes. So it'll be a vacuum, just like you said. I mean, and the meme, is be careful what you wish for. Look what we did in Libya when we had Hillary Clinton she was wanting to win an election, so she needed a big foreign policy story, and what she really created in a story, it killed a lot of people and completely disheveled the place. And then Syria, Obama was supposed to put the lid on these crazy wars in the Middle East, and all it did was we funded ISIS indirectly and some directly, and it was just a big mess. And this is just a holdover on it. It's never stopped. This whole thing is a culmination of 20 years of American policy, and not necessarily all to American policy. There's a lot of players involved. There's Iran and Russia. Well, the U.S. is adversaries with Iran and Russia, at least geopolitically speaking, when it comes to Russia. So the U.S. couldn't allow Russia to have a presence, too big of a presence, and Iran's trying to fund Hezbollah by proxy to attack Israel. Yeah. It's just a big convoluted mess, and when you have a weaker regional power, a weaker regional player, which is Syria, but strategically located, your prime real estate for your greater powers to come in here and do what they want. And Assad was against the pipeline. I was reading some things about it for whatever reasons, politically speaking, maybe because Syria wasn't going to get a good enough deal out of it. Well, now Assad is gone, and it looks like the pipeline's back on the menu. So we'll see.
Well,
it's funny how that works.
100%. I think the reason is because he was against that pipeline. Because, you just got to remember that during that time, and especially again towards the end, Syria was fully backed and supported by Iran. Right, so I don't think it was in Iran's best interest to allow Turkish influence, especially a Sunni one. And this is what I'm going to talk about here in a minute. In a country where the minority Shia rule in the country, and then it's backed by Iran, it's a big influence for Iran. It's in their best interest to not allow the Turks, which is a Sunni country, to be involved and run pipelines into Syria and have more influence and presence. And that's a thing that a lot of people, and I kind of drifted away from that topic, but I want to go back to it. A lot of people don't really talk about the Sunnis and the Shias, right? And how much of this fighting is also religious fighting, and it's a sect fighting as well. Back in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah and they took power, right? It's a big, religious movement. It's a Shia government, and they wanted to spread that into Iraq, right? Because Iraq has a Shia population, like a majority Shia population, and so that and I'm pretty sure, and I'm almost positive. I mean, I'm sure you hear a lot of different opinions in why the 1980 to 1988 Iraq-Iran war started. But a big part of it is because Iran wanted to spread the Islamic Revolution into Iraq because of all the Shia holy shrines in Iraq and the big majority being Shias. And they fought over it for 8 years. But nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that part. Same Syria, and the same thing. It's a Shia ruling government, and it's in Iran's best interest to support that, because if they don't, you can have the Saudis and the Turks, because the Saudis also been supporting. They support all the Sunni groups or governments to fight against Iran's interests in the region. In Saudi Arabia, it's kind of the same thing. They don't want to get involved directly, but they want to support the Sunnis to put the Shia expansion in its place. Jason, like, this dates way back. This is way before me and you even existed. The Persians at the time was in Iran, and the Muslims, the Caliphates, they fought for a long time. And it's over the same thing over and over again. I think one of the caliphs, Omar bin Khattab, said something one day, and it's something along the lines where, if I could put a mountain of fire between us and Persia, I would. Right, and this is one of his quotes, and this dates like many years ago, hundreds of years ago, so the religious fighting between Iran or Persia back then and the rest of the Middle East and the Muslims, especially the Sunni population, it's been going on for a long time. We saw the same thing in Iraq after 2003. It became a sectarian, government. It became a sectarian violence. Shia killing Sunnis, Sunnis killing Shia. There was a time in Iraq where you couldn't even walk or drive into a Sunni area with the Shia name, like Ali or Hussein, for example. You have to get a fake ID. Same thing for the Sunnis. They couldn't go to a Shia-controlled area in the mid-2000s if your name is Omar or Abu Bakr or any kind of Sunni name that kind of stands out. They would kill you on the spot. And the only reason is because they're Sunnis and they're Shias. There was nothing else behind it. So there's a lot of generational hate and conflict that goes into this bigger conflict that people don't really talk about. So it's never ending. Like the HTS, for example, they're Sunni, they're hardcore Sunni group, not just some regular Sunnis, right? Especially if they're from Al Qaeda and ISIS. They're hardcore Sunnis. You got the Alawites, who are like mainly Shias, and the Kurds. They've always been kind of the black sheep of every conflict, really. All right, but I'm just gonna let them just kind of have their own thing, and I don't think so. And then you got the Turks, are also a Sunni country, and that's why they back the HTS, because they're a Sunni group that can take down Bashar, who was a Shia, right? Is also supported by Iran, which is the biggest player in the region when it comes to supporting Shia governments. Is also supporting Bashar. So it's a big also religious conflict that and sect conflict that people don't talk about. Because especially in the West, it's really not that big here, like in the United States or even like other places here. Yeah, maybe there's some animosities here and there between, I don't know, let's say Catholics and Presbyterians, for example, but it's not at that level, right? It's very minimal, and it's almost like people don't really care about. But in the Middle East, however, it's very different. To this day, there are people that don't want to become friends with Shias only because they're Shias. Same thing with the Shias. They don't want to become friends with Sunnis because of that. So this is generational animosity and the generational hate that's going to play a big part, in my opinion, in this current conflict in Syria, and definitely moving forward. You can't discount that. It's been a big part of every conflict in the Middle East. Especially now, which is funny. In Iraq now, all the key positions in the government, they're controlled by Shia. Right? You got Hadi al-Amiri, Qais al-Khazali, who else? Just other names, kind of just to name a few, right? They're big Shia, key figures, 100% supported by Iran, and they hold all the big positions in the country. And the Sunnis are pretty much just a former legacy of itself. Really, they're not really even doing it. They don't hold anything in Iraq, and same thing happened in Syria. So it's always been a sectarian fight as well that people overlook a lot. But that's going to fuel your next conflict in Syria 100%.
Yeah.
Of course, there's strategic, political, economic military, and all that kinds, absolutely. But that religious conflict is going to feed in, it's going to fuel a lot of your upcoming conflicts in Syria and honestly the rest of the Middle East.
The color of it is what you're saying. The color of it is definitely religious based, sectarian. These differences in interpretation of whatnot. The city of Qom. I was trying to remember some of these cities. Iran was another target country of mine that I was pretty familiar with, and I've always wondered, as far as let's say the Shia world, Iran is, you know, Saudi Arabia for the Sunni, or Rome for the Catholics, right? That is your brain power. That's where your schools are at. There's another big influential city in Iran. It's Qom, and there's another one. There's another big Shia educational center. So it's the power, or the intellectual, theological epicenter for the Shia world. So, right? I mean, if you're going to be Shia, Iran is it's your Rome, so to speak, in terms of Catholicism. Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they also, oh, by the way, they sit on top of the most strategic asset when it comes to shipping oil, which is the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
Yep.
Militarily, they're a minor power. I mean, they got a professional expeditionary force. They got professional soldiers, and they got a pretty good asymmetric warfare capability. I mean, they've been early adopters of drone and they've outfitted those islands in the Persian Gulf. Kishim Island, for example, they've really built that place up militarily speaking, and they do a lot of drones operations out. They have some stuff that's hidden in hills, and Bandar Abbas. They have some stuff in Bandar Abbas that's pretty cool. They got some old rust bucket frigates held over from England, from Great Britain, which when the Shah fell, they just kept all the equipment, and of course Great Britain could get their equipment out of there. So I mean, they've been left behind. They have F-4 Tomcats, and they got some old remnants, Western. We're talking 1960s technology, but they have re-engineered some things, reverse engineered some things, they've updated best they could. There's a joke in the intelligence community. We call the Iranians the Germans of the Middle East. They're pretty industrious when they have to be. But you're right, man. This stuff is. Look, I don't know if it's a bunch of madmen trying to bring the 12th Imam back, and they're willing to do it through nuclear. I don't know if it's all of that, because if it was the case, then they would have already done it. They just seized power in 1979, and they haven't given it up since. So maybe they're not all that interested in being martyrs just yet. They probably don't have a problem creating other martyrs, but I don't think the regime wants to be a martyr yet. That's usually the way it goes. But they are really good at leveraging what they have in terms of asymmetrical warfare, proxy warfare. They have a bunch of front companies that they've set up that are disguised as construction companies, and humanitarian aid, their versions of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, where they run guns, munitions, and money to their proxy recipients, which is Hezbollah, Hamas. Now you see the Houthis, and there's other places they have. I don't know. There's some debate as if Russia and Iran are partners in some aspects. I don't know. Maybe, perhaps. I don't know about militarily. It could be, but yeah, man, Iran's going to be a player no matter what. I mean, they have a large population. They're in a strategic location, and like I said, they're the epicenter of Shia civilization or Shia theocracy. They're significant, and regardless of their peer-to-peer power, yeah, they may not be, but they're still a regional power in terms of what they could accomplish in the Middle East, militarily, soft power, diplomatically, etc.
100%.
Yeah, the sanctions have hurt them. Obviously, they've done their job. I mean, we've prevented them. They can't get parts for travel. I mean, there's been times when their president and they can't really travel internationally because sometimes the plane they have is it's too unreliable. So sometimes they'll ship it off maybe to Russia or China, I don't know, some of these other countries, and they'll get it refitted. But then now you're beholden to another set of technology. When the plane itself was Western, maybe it was Western designed, and now you got different electronics and different manuals, different languages. So it causes all these little small details that you don't think about, or we don't think about until you start reading about it. And you're like, wow, it's a big deal to have new electronic equipment in your plane when it's Russian versus whatever Chinese. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That's why they. That's a great point, actually. That's why they became creative and reverse engineer and a few things, or even build their own things because they
Yep.
they became creative and because they just had to, right? They don't because they'll do all the sanctions, but also just let's not forget that Iraq has been the like the lifeline basically, or like the artery to Iran when it comes to finances, right? There's a lot of money, oil money, and just other revenues that goes to Iran from Iraq, and the reason is because Iraq, the way it is today, you have it's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of becoming like a Syria slowly but surely, where you have a few key leaders in charge of the country and the military and the police in there, but they're only there by the grace of Iran, right? So it's one of those things like, hey man, we will keep you here. You'll have all the money, you can steal whatever you want, be as corrupt as you want, but this is what you owe us, and that's why the Shias has been able to control the country after 2003 for such a long time, even all the sectarianism they created, and even after ISIS almost took Baghdad because of the sectarianism that the Iraq government created. However, Iran supported them because, hey, we'll keep you here as long as you keep, helping us financially in other ways. Same thing with the PMF, and then Qasem Soleimani, when he was a big deal at the time, going through Iraq and Syria, managing these proxies to fight, to keep the Iraqi government really, in its place and not get taken by ISIS. So Iraq has been a big supply line, especially when it comes to money through to Iran from Iraq. Iraq plays a big part in that. And you mentioned also Iran has always been good at leveraging, and especially like doing things like asymmetrical and whatnot. So this kind of dates back for also centuries ago. The Persians at the time, they were one of the best when it comes to proxy wars and assassinations and so on and so forth. There are documentaries about them. They were very creative with their ways of leveraging other places and countries to carry out their interests and carry out their hits, if you will, assassinations and proxies. I don't remember exactly which caliph they killed. I think it was Omar, actually. I think the Persians killed Omar, if I'm not mistaken. He was praying and they stabbed him with a poisoned dagger. And it was a Persian assassin that came from Persia and assassinated him. They knew where he was going to be, and not that it was a big secret at the time or anything like that, or they weren't practicing like secrecy. But the Persians they've always been good at leveraging other places and conducting proxy wars centuries ago, and they still do it to this day. Iraq and Syria and Lebanon is the greatest example of that.
Yeah, well, they've killed their people on American soil. I think there was one of the recent hits was in, I could be wrong, maybe 2006 or 8. They killed a Iranian dissident I think he killed him in Washington D.C. I want to say they walked into a restaurant and killed him.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a restaurant in D.C. where a gentleman, he's dead now. I think his family still owns it, but he started a restaurant, Persian restaurant in D.C., and he left after the revolution. I think he was a member. I think he was in the military. You can read a little about it. I had a friend that spoke Persian, Farsi, and he was telling me about I lived in D.C. I lived outside of D.C. We're right around D.C. Right, might as well call it D.C. for almost 5 years. And anyway, he started a restaurant. And somehow or another, it started becoming funded by the government or one of our agencies, and they would run ops out of that restaurant. They gave him protection, but all this while the dissidents would meet and they would gather intelligence from the homeland, and then they would discuss it. And then I guess every week or whatever, he'd have a package that he would send up to his handlers. And anyway, that was the story. You never know where you're sitting, and you never know who you're around, especially in a place like D.C., where you have operatives running left and right in every restaurant you go to on certain streets. In fact, if you're in that community, you get briefings all the time about staying away from this or avoiding that type of conversation. It's nuts because everybody wants access to what you have, especially if you're a high cleared individual. And most folks in the, not most, but you're going to meet a lot of guys in DC who are somehow working for the government in some way, some capacity. And then if you, befriend someone who's in the intelligence community, and you start running, ops on them. I mean, you think about how many times we've been breached. I mean, I've been through two OPM breaches, and I know Iran was behind one of them. I mean, they disclosed that. I wonder. Not that I don't care anymore because I haven't been in that world since 2015. But I've always wondered. Yeah. I always wondered what if you have a passport, and let's say I wanted to go to Shiraz in Iran and go visit it, and if I landed in some airport in Iran, I wonder if they'd, just check my name because I'm an American. If they would have a file on me because of a breach that took place in 2012 or whatever. Who knows, man?
Wouldn't be surprised. I mean, yeah, their influence is big, man. It's when I was in Iraq last, which wasn't very long ago, I was deployed there. I've made a good network there in Iraq, and met a lot of personalities. Some of them were good, but there were some that you can see how influenced they are by the Iranian presence or just Iranian ideas in like in Iraq specifically. Some of them were just too scared to even talk about Iran in any kind of way or any kind of militia that is backed by Iran, and because a lot of these people. Especially the higher you go in the government, those positions are appointed to you. Like they're given to you by the key players, which is the Iranians, basically, to kind of put you in that position. So a lot of them, like a lot of the positions in Iraq to this day, it's influenced by Iran, 100%.
Absolutely, man.
You don't get high enough in government or certain positions without their, I guess, blessings on it.
How long, if you don't mind me asking, when you did ops or you deployed to Iraq, how long did you spend time in the country there?
Excuse me. I was in Iraq for 6 years. I'm sorry, Jesus, 6 months. I apologize.
Okay.
6 months, and it was a very busy 6 months for sure. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of, met a lot of personalities. I got a good insight on the Iraqis at the time, especially within the government and military. And I wish I could just kind of say more about it, but like you can clearly see when there's certain things were happening or certain operations that would just get to a grinding halt because of somebody in the government or high position in the military that's affiliated or a member of said group or militia that was 100% supported by Iran, and they're in the military, like they're in the government, and I'm like, and you just kind of your hands are tight because some of the key military members there in government as well.
Absolutely,
they will have some supportive, and yeah, so it was very interesting to see. After spending 18 years in the Middle East, and then you finally go back, like a U.S. like soldier, and you start working there, whether it's Syria and Iraq, and you see all like, oh my God, like this is, it's all the same thing, Iranian influence, ITNs, all these militia groups. I mean, they're alive because of the Iranian support and their funding, but it got all the way to military members. High military members, officials, even government, not just low level militia leaders, and it's pretty crazy.
It's just funny that we spent so much time and treasure in that place, and then only for it to more or less be consumed to a certain degree. I'm sure the U.S. still has plenty of influence in that country if they wanted it, and they probably still do. But there's always that competing interest, like you said, along the Shia-Sunni fault lines, and then you have Iran's got twice the GDP of Iraq, which that helps too. When you got more money, you can buy people off, you can support infrastructure, you can build a clientele, so to speak. Only for though to be followed to the influence of Iran it's one of those strange strange things of U.S. foreign policy that I think come to no avail. Again, in the grand scheme of things, should people like Saddam Hussein be in charge of a country? No, I guess not. But I mean, at the same time, is it for you to go in there and start removing people and doing regime change just to create something else you can't control? We couldn't control Saddam, or he was doing this. He invaded Kuwait. He was disrupting the oil supply. Or he had disproportionate power compared to his neighbors. Whatever the case may be, we had to check him. And then we go and invade him post 9/11 because we were internally we needed a release for this stuff. We got to go back and go punish some enemies here. And then all you got out of it was another scenario where perhaps you're not in control as much as you thought you were. Hubris comes to mind when I think of things like that. Again, it's what's done is done. Same thing with Afghanistan. 2 years. I've called 22 years. $1 trillion and tens of thousands of people dead.
Yep.
Only for it to come crashing down in no time. As soon as the U.S. president leaves, the Taliban's back in charge. We're right back where we started. What a gutted adventure that turned out to be. So
it's a big mess.
It is, man.
You're right, bro.
Huh?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I mean I enjoyed my time in Iraq as much as you could in wartime. Meaning, I understood where I was at. This was history. As a kid. I mean, I was so much of a kid. I guess I was 26, 27. Enough, not old enough, but I was still a kid looking back. But I was excited. I was a part of history. I was in war. I was doing this. I was doing some cool things. I had some cool capabilities, and I was supporting these. We were these Army infantry guys, and I went to go to this shake and bake infantry school, and I got to my combat team, and they taught me more. We used to create mock houses out of gasoline tanks, or stack them. Not a complete house, but you know what I mean. An outline of a house, how to hit a staircase, how to turn a corner, and then we had some mock-up villages we did. And it was just, that was cool, doing something that you're not. I mean, I'm an intel guy. I wasn't never a tactical soldier, but they train you to do it just enough to keep you alive and not get anybody else hurt and killed. But for the most part, you're right next to the lieutenant because he's not going to let anything happen to you. And you get a little more experience, and then people start getting a little more used to you. They let you kick indoors and to go on some raids. And we went on a bunch of raids, but it was. I guess I enjoyed it. It was anarchy in terms of the level of power you had when you went out. You went out at night, and you had to own a block because you couldn't let anything bad happen to anybody. So you would just cordon off an area, throw your snipers up, and then you would dismount and go hit these houses. I mean, we got to arrest based on some intel. Again, the target packages based on some intel. We arrested one of my biggest takedowns was a guy from Parliament. And we found him in a house. He was sleeping, and we raided him, and that was one of my big ones. And I caught a guy in a terrorist cell. He was a gun runner and a IED distributor. I think he was from the JAM, JAM. I can't remember that. I can't remember what it stands for, but acronym was JAM. And he was a big guy. I mean, I wouldn't call him like tier 1, but he was pretty influential. He was connected to some big guys that they were operated out of they left Baghdad, but I can't remember one of the big chieftains that he was connected to. We just never could get to him. And then the rest of it, man, was a lot of, how it goes. You're supposed to go to a certain house, and say the description is it has a chicken coop in front of it or in the front yard. Well, this one happens to have a bird coop. You're like, okay, well, it looks kind of like a chicken coop. There's no chickens in it, though. It's a bird coop. Oh, no, this is the house. This is the one. It's what Intel says. And, it's got a Mercedes, but it's a white Mercedes. It's not a SUV or whatever.
Yeah.
Hit it anyway. So you get in so anyway, we go hit this house. Turns out to be he was a retired general in the Iraqi army. He was probably in his late 60s. And he acted like a general. Like, he was stoic. He had soldiers in his house. He knew how to talk to people. And he had his massive book collection. He had Arab, Russian, French, and English. I saw some of his books was in all these different languages. So, of course, I had to ask him, like, man, these are your books? He goes, yes, yes, yes. He come over and pointed one of them, and I'm on an op. I'm still like mesmerized by this dude's library. He had a nice house too. Turns out, wrong house. It was a bird coop, not a chicken coop. We were in the wrong neighborhood, and they made us hit it anyway. And then I'll tell you a story. Once somebody at the same house, somebody took that Mercedes emblem off his car. So he's escorting us out, and we're walking outside the house, and we're about to leave. And he stops. He says, Lieutenant. And Lieutenant turns around and looks at him. He goes, I don't remember his exact words, but he had that general persona. Mm-hmm. Like he'd been in the military a long time. He made you respect him, is what I'm getting at. Like you could just tell he'd been around the block. And I wouldn't say he chastised the lieutenant. He knew not to do that. But he did talk to him directly. And he just basically said, one of your men took this emblem off this car, and I'd like it back. And he basically so many words, do you not know how to, looks bad on you, Lieutenant, as an officer. Mm-hmm. And I've never heard a guy talk, but he got away with it. Turns out one of our guys did take the emblem like a knucklehead, and it was brought back to him. So you get some goofballs, man. You know how it goes. You get some 11 Bravos. Oh, yeah. Some of them are shit hot, and other ones are some shit bags. So they're all good guys, man. Well, look, this was a good. We've been going at it for almost 2 hours, man. Let's.
It's good. Yeah, I'm glad.
So obviously, Watani is not your name, but we're gonna give you that name here. Watani means patriot in Arab. So I wanted to give you a shout out for that, and thank you for your service. I think you got a cool story. I wanted to bring you on. I know we didn't get down into the super geeky stuff of Syria, but we did cover a lot here as it relates, and history's unfolding right before our eyes, and it's still not being written yet, especially when it relates to that country and how this is all going to shake loose, man. This is going to be another hotbed, more than likely, and it'll be popping up, and the new president's coming in here in, a month? And who knows what's going to happen after that. People are probably sitting on their hands because of that reason. And then we'll see once the administration changes what happens in Iraq, what happens in Ukraine, if that comes to an end some way, one way or another, and then what happens in Syria. There's going to be a lot of focus on that, especially if that pipeline situation comes in. Yeah, we're going to see how this is. But I'm going to let you have it, man. You're my guest. I'm going to let you close out with whatever you want, and I just want to thank you for joining us here.
No, I just want to say thank you for having me here. It's been great. I'm glad we got to talk and discuss all these things. Honestly, I feel like we can, if we want to get into the details and the geeky things, I mean, we would sit here for like 4 hours.
Yep.
Because this region, the Middle East, it's so fluid. It just changes all the time, and I've seen it. Just living in that region for 18 years, I always make the joke every time I deploy, especially to the Middle East, is that, man, you can go to sleep today and you're gonna wake up to a civil war, right? And it's true. It happened in 2006. If you look back in Iraq in 2006, when I think one of the Shia shrines was attacked and bombed by Al Qaeda was at the time, but then they blamed it on the Sunnis, and that's pretty much started the civil war. I mean, the sectarian war started between the Sunnis and Shias, and the remnants of that still exist to this day. But it was people went to their beds and just woke up the next day to that, right?
Yep.
So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen. I feel like you can kind of make some predictions of some of the scenarios we talked about. Honestly, either one or more than one of those will happen. I'm pretty sure. But it's been great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I feel like we talked about a lot of good things, and we'll see what happens next in the next couple of months, and maybe we'll reconvene this and talk about the things that we talked about a couple of months. Hey, remember when we talked this is going to happen, and we'll see how it goes.
We'll have a mixed bag of we'll be half right and half wrong. You know how it goes. It's unpredictable.
Yeah, of course.
But there's going to be a playbook it will play to a certain degree. These certain things will happen. Now, the second and third order effects, no one knows about, and it may not be the key player that we thought, but there's going to be some changes in Syria. I don't know if any maps will be redrawn. I don't know that, but we'll see. Well, Israel's already kind of redrawn a map in some ways, but they said that they're not going to go further than the Golan Heights, so we'll see how that works out. All right, my man. Well, look, enjoy the rest of your evening, and again, thank you for your service. and we'll stay in touch. We'll see what happens, and we'll come back to do this again.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to it, guys.
All right,
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right,
Yeah.
bye-bye. All right, that was Watani. Again, obviously that's not his real name, but for security reasons, he's active in the special forces community. We wanted to keep him anonymous here, but he has a good story. We're going to get into more of that a little later. I think he can come back on and tell us a little bit more about his story. But it's a very interesting one. Grew up in the Middle East, come to America, joined the U.S. military. I'm sure the military situation there required him to move to the U.S. and then he joins the services and he became a soldier, and then he applied those skills and assets to the U.S. mission. So it's always, you never know who you meet in life. It's very interesting. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon.